I was sitting in my husband's chair when my daughter-in-law pushed a stack of papers across the mahogany table and said, "The company belongs to Derek now. Richard built it. You should step aside." No one moved. I looked at my son. Derek kept his eyes lowered, studying the polished leather of his shoes, as if the answer to everything were written there. Monica leaned back. "You were Richard's wife, Margaret. That doesn't make you qualified to run an $18 million company." I opened the black file Richard had left behind. Inside was a certified DNA report, a preliminary forensic audit, and a note in his handwriting. "Maggie, let them finish talking before you show them what I found." 3 days earlier, I had buried my husband. The lilies from the funeral still filled the house with their heavy, sweet scent. By morning, the flowers had begun to open too wide, their pale petals curling at the edges. They stood in every room like quiet witnesses to a life that had ended before I was ready. Richard's coffee cup remained beside the kitchen sink. I had washed the casseroles serving trays and glassware our neighbors brought after the service. I had folded the sympathy cards into a neat stack and placed them beside the telephone. But I had not touched that cup. A thin brown ring had dried along the bottom. His reading glasses rested next to it, one arm folded beneath the other. For 43 years, there had always been some evidence of him nearby. Keys on the counter, a jacket over a chair, a newspaper folded open to the business section. Now those small things felt heavier than furniture. I stood at the sink with both hands against the granite and listened to the house settle around me. Richard and I had chosen that granite together after Caldwell Freight Systems turned its first truly profitable year. He wanted something dark and expensive. I wanted something that would not show coffee stains. We compromised as we had on most things. The company had begun with less. One used delivery truck, $600 in savings, a folding table in the corner of a rented duplex. Richard drove the routes and found the customers. I kept the books called Overdue Accounts, Negotiated Fuel Terms, and learned enough contract law to stop us from signing away the company during our second winter. People remembered Richard standing in front of trucks with his sleeves rolled up. They rarely remembered me sitting on the floor at 2 a.m. sorting invoices, while Derek slept in a laundry basket beside me because we could not afford childcare. Richard never forgot. At least I believed he never did. The doorbell rang at 11. Monica stood on the porch in a fitted black suit, holding a thick folder beneath one arm. Her makeup was flawless. Her eyes looked clear and dry. She stepped forward and brushed her cheek against mine. "How are you holding up?" Before I could answer, she moved past me into the foyer. "Derek is coming," she said. "We need to take care of a few urgent matters before the estate meeting." "What matters?" "The company." She said it as though the answer should have been obvious. I led her into the kitchen. She placed the folder on the counter beside Richard's coffee cup. The impact made the spoon inside it rattle. Across the first page, printed in bold capital letters, were the words, "Emergency Succession and Executive Stability Agreement." I looked up at her. "What is this?" "A temporary transfer of authority." "To whom?" "Derek." She opened the folder and turned it toward me. The first document gave Derek control over executive appointments, major contracts, financial approvals, and communications with the company's lenders. Another section referred to Chase, my 18-year-old grandson, as the next biological beneficiary under the Caldwell Family Trust. A gold pen lay across the signature page, already uncapped. "You came prepared," I said. Monica folded her hands. "I came to make this easier." The front door opened before I could respond. Derek entered without knocking. He crossed the kitchen and put both hands on my shoulders. "Mom!" His face looked drawn. He had lost weight during the final months of Richard's illness. For a moment, I saw grief in him, real and unguarded. Then he looked at the documents. "We're trying to protect what you and Dad built." I waited. He did not correct himself. "What I built too?" I asked. His hands left my shoulders. "Of course." The answer came too quickly. Monica leaned against the counter. "You have not been involved in daily operations for 12 years. The board needs continuity. The lenders need confidence. The employees need someone active. The company has senior management. The company had Richard." The room went still. Derek gave her a brief look, then turned back to me. "Mom, she doesn't mean it that way." "How does she mean it?" He exhaled. "You've been through 6 terrible months. Your blood pressure is high. You barely slept during Dad's treatment. Let me take this off your plate." It was the kind of sentence that sounded loving until you noticed where the pen had been placed. I turned another page. Near the end was a clause allowing incoming management to certify prior company activity on behalf of Richard's estate. Another clause protected the new executives from certain liabilities tied to transactions completed before the handover. I read it twice. Why must this happen before Victor reads the will? Monica's mouth tightened. Because business does not stop for grief. My husband's estate can wait 3 days. The company may not. I closed the folder. I'll review it. Monica glanced at Derek. Margaret, delay creates uncertainty. So does signing something I don't understand. No one is trying to pressure you, Derek said. I looked at the gold pen. Then there is no problem. He touched Monica's arm. Let's give her time. They stayed another 10 minutes speaking gently about rest stability and family responsibility. At the front door, Derek hugged me. Monica stepped onto the porch first. As I began closing the door, I heard her whisper, "She's exhausted. She'll sign." Their car pulled away. I returned to the kitchen and carried the folder into Richard's study. His desk smelled of cedar paper and the faint medicinal scent that clung to his clothes during his final weeks. The bottom drawer was locked. Inside my jewelry box, I found the small brass key Richard had worn on his key ring for years. The drawer opened. Beneath insurance files and old tax records lay an envelope with my name written across it. Maggie, if they bring you papers before Victor reads my instructions, sign nothing. I started looking into the company 6 weeks ago. Victor has the rest. Inside was a safe deposit key and a second note. Do not confront them until you know what they are trying to make you approve. 2 hours later, I sat in a private room at the bank with a sealed black file resting in front of me. Across the cover, Richard had written, "For Margaret, only family ownership and succession." My son and his wife believed grief had made me easy to remove. Richard's final file told me he had spent his last weeks preparing for the moment they tried. Victor Lang did not open the black file until his assistant had closed the conference room door and confirmed that no one else was waiting outside. Rain pressed softly against the windows of his office, turning the city beyond them into gray shapes and blurred headlights. The room smelled of dark coffee leather bindings and the lemon oil used on the long walnut table between us. Victor had represented Richard and me for almost 25 years. He had drafted our first serious acquisition agreement, defended us through a labor dispute, and once spent an entire night rewriting a loan package after a bank tried to change the terms hours before closing. He had never been warm, but he had always been exact. Did Derek or Monica see you retrieve this? He asked. Number. Did they know Richard kept a separate file? Not that I know of. Victor nodded and opened the cover. The first document was an updated ownership summary dated 6 weeks before Richard died. I leaned forward. My name appeared beside 52% of Caldwell Freight Systems voting shares. Richard's estate held 31%. The remaining 17% belonged to the employee trust and several senior executives. I still own 52%, I asked. You always did. I thought some of my shares were consolidated when I stepped away. Your operational role changed. Your ownership did not. I looked at the figure again. For 12 years, I had attended fewer meetings, reviewed fewer contracts, and allowed Richard and Derek to handle the public side of the company. Somewhere along the way, I had begun to speak about Caldwell Freight Systems as though it belonged more to them than to me. The law had not made that mistake. Victor turned another page. Richard's shares do not pass directly to Derek. They move into a legacy trust. You retain voting authority over them during your lifetime. So Derek has no controlling interest. Number. Does he know? Richard believed he assumed otherwise. I thought about the papers Monica had brought into my kitchen. She had not asked what Richard's will contained. She had arrived prepared to replace it. Victor removed his glasses and placed them on the table. There is more. He opened a folder marked Preliminary Forensic Review. The date on the first page was 5 weeks earlier. I looked up. Richard started an audit. He did. The relief I felt was immediately followed by pain. Richard had spent the last weeks of his life hiding more from me than I knew. Victor seemed to understand. He did not tell you because he did not have proof yet. He also believed you were carrying enough. What did he find? Not enough to accuse anyone, enough to be concerned. Richard had noticed irregular vendor payments, unusual withdrawals from restricted accounts, and changes in executive access permissions. He had authorized Victor to retain an outside forensic accounting team before his health deteriorated. They have been working quietly for 36 days, Victor said. Most of the records were collected before Richard died. That changed the shape of everything. The audit had not discovered millions in a single night. Richard had already followed the trail most of the way. What remains, I asked. Current authorization logs the final transfer attempts and proof of who intended to use your signature. Victor slid the succession agreement toward himself. We need to know whether this document was drafted to solve a legitimate governance problem or to conceal one. By 7 the next morning, I was standing in the lobby of Caldwell Freight Systems. The building had changed since I worked there daily. Our original warehouse had been replaced by glass offices, polished concrete, and a digital map displaying routes across 5 states. But some things remained. Diesel from the loading yard. Burned coffee from the driver's lounge. The cold draft that entered each time the freight doors opened. Luis, the morning security guard, stood when he recognized me. Mrs. Caldwell, I'm sorry about Mr. Caldwell. Thank you. I crossed to the executive elevator and swiped my card. The panel flashed red. I tried again. Red. Luis approached slowly. There was a security update yesterday. Authorized by whom? Mr. Derek. Of course. I took the public elevator upstairs. The executive floor was mostly empty. I walked to the archive room and tried my card again. Another red light. Margaret. Bradley Jenkins stepped from the break room carrying a porcelain mug. He wore a charcoal suit and a silver tie. Even before 7 in the morning, he looked arranged. Your access appears restricted, he said. It appears that way. Derek approved a temporary restructuring of executive permissions. Sensitive files are being protected while the estate is settled. Protected from me. His smile remained. From unnecessary disruption. I looked at him. Who decides what is unnecessary? The active management team. There is no newly appointed management team. Not formally. There it was. A future already being treated as present. Bradley took a sip of coffee. You should be home. Richard's death was a tremendous shock. Yes, no one expects you to concern yourself with daily operations now. Caldwell Freight Systems concerns me. Emotionally, certainly. Financially. Legally. Historically. He adjusted his cuff. This was Richard's life's work. Ours. For the first time, his expression slipped. Only slightly. Then the polished smile returned. Of course. I walked away. The younger version of me would have demanded immediate access called security and forced the issue in front of everyone. But Monica had already framed me as exhausted and unstable. I would not provide supporting evidence. Helen Brooks found me near the operations balcony. She had worked beside us for 32 years and still wore steel-toed boots beneath her tailored slacks. She hugged me without speaking. The kindness nearly undid me. Richard was difficult, she said when she stepped back. He was. He was also loyal. Yes, she led me into an empty scheduling office and closed the door. They moved the board meeting to Friday. Who? Derek and Bradley. What else? Monica has attended finance meetings. Bradley has reviewed personnel files. 2 department heads were told you are retiring permanently. Who said that? He said it came from the family. The word felt almost obscene. Helen studied me. Margaret, are you retiring? Number. Her shoulders relaxed. Then she said, they talk as if Richard built everything by himself. I looked down at the scarred desk. The company's first payroll had been calculated on one almost identical to it. I remembered pawning my grandmother's bracelet to cover fuel during our second winter. I remembered finding an accounting error that saved the company from a tax penalty we could not have survived. I remembered driving through ice to deliver medical supplies because Richard had pneumonia and every driver was already assigned. People remember the one who gives the speeches I said. Helen's mouth tightened. I remember the one who made payroll. Later in Richard's office, I opened an old ledger he had kept from our first year. A folded note slipped from between the pages. His handwriting had become unsteady. They think you left the company. You didn't. You only stopped standing where they could see you. I sat in his chair and pressed the paper flat against the desk. That afternoon, Victor called. The audit team had completed the review Richard began. They identified a pending transfer of $1.4 million from an employee retirement reserve. It had stalled because one final authorization was missing: mine. Victor also confirmed that the succession agreement contained a certification of all previous financial activity and an indemnification clause protecting incoming management from earlier irregularities. I looked at Monica's signature tabs, at the place prepared for my name. They were not asking me to leave Richard's company. They were asking me to approve what Richard had already begun uncovering. Victor waited until the conference room door closed before he removed the second envelope from Richard's black file. The rain had stopped, but the windows were still streaked with water. Evening traffic moved below in blurred lines of red and white. My reflection hovered faintly over the glass, older than I felt, steadier than I had any right to be. Across the front of the envelope, Richard had written, "Open only with Margaret present." I recognized the pressure of his pen. The first word was darker than the rest, as if he had paused before continuing. "What is it?" I asked. Victor did not answer immediately. "A genetic report." The words felt strangely small. He broke the seal and placed the contents between us. The report compared 3 biological profiles. Richard's retained from a hospital sample, Derek's collected years earlier during a family medical screening, and Chase's taken during surgery when he was 14. I moved past the technical language and found the conclusion. Derek Caldwell is excluded as the biological father of Chase Caldwell. A second finding stated that Chase shared a strong paternal genetic relationship with Bradley Jenkins. I read the name again. Bradley, the company's chief financial officer, the man who had stood outside the archive room and suggested that Richard's life's work was no longer my concern. The room became so quiet that I could hear the soft click of the heating system behind the wall. "You're certain this is valid?" I asked. "The laboratory is accredited. Richard had the results independently verified." I kept my eyes on the page. For 18 years, Chase had been my grandson. I had held him before Derek did because my son became lightheaded in the delivery room. I had watched Richard carry him through the house after midnight, whispering freight route names as if they were lullabies. I had helped with school projects, attended baseball games, and hidden Christmas presents in the attic because Chase always searched the guest room closet first. One page could change the facts of his conception. It could not rewrite every year that followed. "The test changes what the adults did," I said. "It does not erase him." Victor nodded. Richard wrote the same thing. He removed a letter from the file. The handwriting was faint but clear. "Maggie, none of this is Chase's fault. Whatever happens, do not let them punish the boy for choices made before he could speak." I pressed my fingertips against the edge of the paper. That was the man I had married. Proud enough to write bloodline provisions into a trust, yet still capable of understanding that love did not disappear because biology became inconvenient. When did Richard learn this? 9 months ago. Before his diagnosis. Shortly before. Victor placed another document in front of me. It was an email printed from an archived account. The date was 10 years earlier. The sender was Derek. The recipient was Monica. The first paragraph described a medical appointment. "The specialist confirmed I am infertile. There is no reasonable chance I can father a child." I continued reading. Derek wrote that the family trust favored biological descendants. He feared Richard might eventually shift control away from him if there were no direct heir. Then came the line that removed any possibility that my son had simply been deceived. "We keep everything as it is. Chase remains my son publicly. Mom and Dad never need to know. As long as they believe he is the next Caldwell heir, the trust stays protected." I set the email down. He knew. For at least 10 years. He knew Bradley was the father. Richard believed Derek knew enough to understand the truth. The testing confirmed Bradley's paternity. I looked toward the dark window. Derek had watched Richard teach Chase how to read fuel reports and route maps. He had accepted the college account we created. He had listened while Richard spoke proudly about a third generation entering the company. All the while, he had calculated what the belief was worth. I had spent the last 3 days wondering whether my son was weak. The email showed something harder to forgive. He had been deliberate. Victor opened another section of the file. Richard did not begin the financial review because of the DNA test, he said. The 2 issues converged later. The preliminary audit had started 5 weeks before Richard died. It identified 4 outside vendors receiving unusually large payments for vague consulting and logistics services. The companies produced little verifiable work. One shared a registered mailing address with an entity previously associated with Bradley. Another had paid expenses tied to Monica private travel furnishings, tuition, and a vehicle lease. The suspicious payments totaled $2.8 million over 20 months. The team had already traced most of the transactions before Richard's death. What remained was linking them to the succession agreement and confirming whether restricted employee funds had been used. Victor turned to the final page. Richard suspected part of the money came from employee benefit reserves. The DNA report had made my hands cold. That sentence made them steady. Caldwell Freight Systems had survived years when Richard and I had almost nothing because we never missed payroll. We delayed our mortgage. We sold furniture. Once during a fuel crisis, I wore the same winter coat for 7 years because every spare dollar belonged to keeping drivers paid and insured. Derek knew those stories. He had grown up hearing them at the dinner table. What did he approve, I asked. Several vendor payments. The audit team is still determining what he knew about the source accounts. He signed them. Yes. My phone began vibrating against the table. Derek. I watched his name light the screen. Victor said nothing. I answered, Mom. His voice was gentle. I've been worried. Monica said you went to the office. I did. You should be resting. I'm tired. That required no acting. A pause followed. Then he lowered his voice. Have you thought about the papers? I looked at the email proving he had hidden the truth for a decade. At length. We need an answer before Friday. I don't know if I can carry all of this without your father. The relief in his silence was almost audible. You don't have to. Maybe you and Monica are right. He took a breath. Come to the house tomorrow, I said. Bring the final agreement and every financial summary connected to it. Of course. And Derek. Yes, bring everything. After the call, I returned the DNA report to the black file. Beside Victor's legal pad sat a photograph from Chase's graduation. Richard stood on one side of him. I stood on the other. Chase had one arm around each of us. The report did not tell me whether he belonged in that picture. He already did. It told me something else. My family had not been protecting a child. They had been protecting a claim. I spent the next afternoon preparing my house to look exactly the way Derek and Monica expected grief to look. I left the curtains in Richard's study half closed. I placed his photograph on the corner of the desk and kept the overhead lights off, allowing the room to remain dim even as evening settled outside. A cup of tea sat untouched beside my chair. I wore a black cardigan instead of one of the structured jackets I had once worn to board meetings, and I let my hair fall loose around my face. None of it was entirely false. I was tired. I had slept badly for months first because Richard was ill and then because he was gone. My hands did tremble occasionally. My appetite had narrowed to toast soup and whatever Carol left in the refrigerator after visiting. The performance lay only in letting Derek believe that exhaustion had made me careless. The doorbell rang at 7. I waited several seconds before answering. Derek stood on the porch holding a leather folder. Monica carried a bottle of wine and wore a restrained expression that suggested concern without requiring her to feel it. Mom, Derek said, "You look worn out." "I am." He hugged me, and for one brief moment I allowed myself to remember the child he had been. At 8, he had been terrified of thunderstorms. He would stand in our bedroom doorway clutching his blanket until I lifted the covers and let him crawl between us. The man holding me now had learned to use my instinct to protect him. Monica kissed my cheek. "We're going to get you through this," she said. I stepped aside and let them enter. In the study, Derek noticed Richard's photograph immediately. His face changed. The grief there was real. Whatever else my son had become, he had loved his father. That truth did not excuse him. It only made the betrayal less simple. We sat without speaking for a moment. The old clock on the mantel ticked steadily. Outside, wind moved through the bare branches beside the windows. I looked at Richard's photograph. The house feels too quiet. Derek leaned forward. "You shouldn't be here alone." "Maybe not." Monica's eyes lifted. I let my shoulders sink slightly. "The company feels even heavier. You don't have to carry it," Derek said. His voice was soft, familiar. I turned to him. Do you really think you're ready? He paused, perhaps surprised that I had asked directly. Yes, Monica answered more quickly. He has been running most of the company for years. That isn't true, I said. The words came out more sharply than I intended. Derek looked at me. I lowered my eyes and took a breath. I'm sorry, I'm tired. That small retreat reassured them. Monica moved closer to the desk. No one is saying Richard didn't remain involved, but Derek understands the company now. He knows the lenders, the vendors, the routes, the board. And Bradley, her left hand tightened slightly around the neck of the wine bottle. Bradley understands the financial side. Do you trust him? The room went still for less than a second. Derek answered. Dad trusted him. I looked at my son. Did he? Derek shifted in his chair. For years. I reached for the tea and let my hand shake lightly around the cup. Monica watched. The succession agreement protects the company from uncertainty, she said. That's all. What happens to the employee retirement reserve? Derek frowned. Why are you asking about that? Your father worried about it. When? Near the end. Monica sat straighter. Richard was heavily medicated near the end. The sentence entered the room quietly, but I heard the purpose behind it. She was preparing a future explanation. If Richard had noticed something, he had been confused. If he had written something, he had been ill. If I repeated his concerns, I was grieving. I looked toward the photograph. Perhaps I misunderstood him. Derek relaxed almost immediately. We'll have the finance team review every account after the transition. Yes. Why not before? He glanced at Monica. She answered. Because the review is part of establishing new oversight. The board wants a clean transition. I folded my hands in my lap. I want the complete financial summary before Friday. Monica's expression remained composed, but she did not answer at once. Derek leaned toward me. Mom, that is hundreds of pages. I used to read hundreds of pages. I know. Do you? His eyes met mine. For the first time that evening, something uncomfortable passed between us. Then he smiled. We'll bring whatever you need. Vendor payments, benefit accounts, major transfers, executive approvals. Monica set the wine bottle down. Margaret, if you try to audit the entire company in 2 days, you will only exhaust yourself. I'm not auditing it. That was true. Richard already had. I want to understand what I'm signing. Derek rubbed his palms together. Of course. He opened the leather folder. The final succession agreement was nearly identical to the earlier draft. Signature tabs marked 7 places. One granted Derek immediate operational control. Another allowed the new executive team to confirm prior transactions on behalf of Richard's estate. The indemnification clause remained near the back. I stopped there. This protects incoming management from earlier liabilities. It's standard, Monica said. Victor says it isn't. Derek's face tightened. You showed this to Victor. He is our attorney. Dad's attorney. Ours. The correction landed harder than I expected. Monica crossed one leg over the other. Victor is cautious by nature. That does not mean the language is improper. Then he should have no objection after reviewing the full financial summary. Silence followed. Derek closed the folder. We'll get you the reports. When? Tomorrow morning. I want printed copies. Monica looked toward him. He gave a small nod. Fine. They believed my insistence came from an old habit I no longer possessed the energy to use. That was useful. Before they left, Derek stood beneath the framed photograph of Richard and me taken on our 30th anniversary. You're doing the right thing, he said. I studied his face. Are you sure? His answer came without hesitation. Yes. I wondered how often he had rehearsed saying it. After their car disappeared beyond the gate, I returned to the study and turned on every light. Victor answered on the first ring. They reacted when I mentioned Bradley and the retirement reserve, I said. How? Monica tightened. Derek redirected. Then they questioned Richard's mental state. Victor was quiet for a moment. That matters. The forensic team had spent the day completing the work Richard began weeks earlier. Because most records were already preserved, they did not need to reconstruct the entire scheme from scratch. They only had to connect the latest transfer attempts and the succession agreement to the existing evidence. By midnight, the picture was clear. Bradley controlled 2 shell vendors through intermediaries. Monica had approved consulting invoices despite holding no formal company position. Derek had signed multiple payment authorizations. One email from him read, "Once Mom certifies the prior transactions, the exposure shifts away from us." Another message from Monica to Bradley stated, "After Friday, remove Helen and anyone who still treats Margaret like an owner." I read the line twice. They were not only trying to remove me from the company, they were trying to remove everyone who remembered I belonged there. The next afternoon, Chase appeared at my door. He looked tired and uncertain, carrying none of the confidence his parents displayed. "Can I come in?" Of course. We sat at the kitchen table. He looked toward Richard's empty chair. "Dad says Friday is when everything changes." "What did he tell you?" "That he'll become CEO. That Grandpa wanted the company to stay in the family." I kept my voice steady. "And what do you want?" He shrugged. "I don't know. Grandpa always said I should work somewhere else first." Despite everything, I smiled. He did. Chase looked down at his hands. He said people respect a title more if you know what it feels like not to have one. That sounded like Richard, too. Then Chase added, "He also said you were the one who kept the company alive whenever he made a bad decision." The words reached somewhere grief had left exposed. Did he say that? All the time. I looked at the boy I had loved for 18 years. He knew nothing. Not about Bradley, not about the report, not about the trust. He was not part of the conspiracy. He was standing inside it. After he left, I called Victor. "The DNA stays private unless it is legally necessary." I agree. "I will not humiliate Chase in front of the board. We can serve the relevant notice confidentially." Good. Victor finalized the termination resolutions, the asset preservation orders, and the referrals to investigators. The audit team prepared a concise presentation based on evidence Richard had already gathered. At 10 that night, Derek sent me a photograph of the boardroom. Richard's chair stood at the head of the table. Beneath it, he wrote, "Tomorrow we finally move forward." I stared at the message for a long time. My son believed I was preparing to surrender his father's chair. I was preparing to ask him in front of everyone exactly what he thought gave him the right to sit in it. The boardroom looked exactly as it had in the photograph Derek sent me. Richard's chair stood at the head of the long mahogany table turned slightly toward the windows. Pale winter light stretched across the polished surface, catching the rims of water glasses and the silver clips on the document folders arranged at every seat. Derek was already sitting in the chair. I stopped just inside the doorway. For one moment, I saw Richard there instead, leaning back with his reading glasses low on his nose, tapping a pen against the table whenever someone avoided answering a direct question. Then Derek looked up. "Mom." He stood, but not immediately. That hesitation told me the chair had already begun to feel like his. Monica sat beside him with the succession agreement arranged in front of her. Bradley occupied the opposite side of the table, wearing a navy suit and the controlled expression of a man who believed the numbers still belonged to him. Helen sat near the far end with 6 board members, the corporate secretary, and 2 outside advisors. Victor's chair was empty. Monica noticed me looking at it. Victor said he might be delayed. "I'm sure he'll arrive when needed." I took the seat halfway down the table rather than the one beside Derek. Monica's mouth tightened. The corporate secretary called the meeting to order. Derek began with a short statement about Richard. He spoke about his father's discipline vision and insistence that the company remain independent. His voice broke once when he mentioned Richard teaching him to inspect truck tires in the original warehouse yard. The grief was real. That made what followed harder to hear. Dad believed in continuity, Derek said. He believed the company should remain under family leadership. Monica slid the succession agreement toward the center of the table. "With Richard's passing, the company needs clarity," she said. "Derek has been involved in operations for years. Margaret has not held an active executive role for more than a decade." Her tone was polished, reasonable. The cruelty lay in how ordinary she made the erasure sound. "She deserves time to grieve," Monica continued. "She should not be forced to carry responsibilities she is no longer prepared to manage." I looked at Derek. He adjusted the cuff of his shirt. Monica placed one hand on the agreement. "The company belongs to Derek now. Margaret should step aside." The room went still. I gave my son one final opportunity. "Do you agree with that?" He looked toward the board instead of at me. "Mom, this is about stability." That was not my question. His jaw tightened. You haven't been involved in daily operations. Do you agree that your father built the company without me? He hesitated. Then he said you supported him. Helen shifted in her chair. I heard the scrape of her boot beneath the table. Supported him, I repeated. Monica exhaled. Margaret, no one is denying that you helped Richard. Helped. This is not the time to argue over wording. It is exactly the time. I opened Richard's black file. The first document I removed was the original ownership agreement. I placed it in front of the corporate secretary. Please read the voting interests. She adjusted her glasses and reviewed the page. Margaret Caldwell holds 52%. Bradley's face changed first. The color drained slowly from around his mouth. Monica leaned forward. That must be outdated. It is current, Victor said from the doorway. Every head turned. He entered carrying 2 binders and a sealed legal envelope. He did not hurry. He took the empty chair beside me and placed the binders on the table. Richard's 31% does not transfer to Derek, he said. It enters the Caldwell Legacy Trust. Margaret retains voting authority during her lifetime. Derek stared at him. That isn't what Dad told me. Victor opened the first binder. It is what he signed. Monica recovered more quickly. Chase remains the next biological beneficiary under the family trust. Her eyes moved toward me. That protects succession. I looked at her. That is what you were counting on. Victor placed the sealed envelope in front of Derek and Monica. This contains private family information. It will not be read aloud or distributed to the board. Monica's hand remained suspended above it. What is it? You may open it. Derek broke the seal. They read together. Monica's face became rigid. Derek lowered the paper as though it had suddenly grown heavy. Bradley looked toward the windows. This is unacceptable, Monica said. What is unacceptable? One board member asked. Victor answered carefully. The biological qualification they intended to rely on does not apply. Monica turned to me. You had no right to investigate Chase. Richard commissioned the test after reviewing existing medical records. This is sick. No, I said quietly. Using that boy's identity to support a claim for control was sick. Derek looked at me. He is still my son. Yes. The answer seemed to surprise him. He is, I continued, and none of this is his fault. Monica's voice sharpened. Then the test is irrelevant. Victor opened the second binder. It would be, except Derek knew the truth for 10 years and concealed it because he believed it preserved access to the trust. He placed the archived email in front of Derek, the one confirming his infertility, the one stating that Richard and I must continue believing Chase was the next biological heir. Derek did not deny writing it. One board member removed his glasses. Another looked away. Derek's voice dropped. This was a private family decision. It became a corporate issue when you used it to support succession, I said. Bradley pushed back from the table. This meeting has lost focus. Helen looked directly at him. No, we're just reaching the part you hoped would stay hidden. The screen at the far end of the room lit up. A forensic accountant entered with a concise presentation based on the investigation Richard had started 5 weeks before his death. 4 shell vendors, fabricated consulting invoices, payments approved by Bradley, expenses linked to Monica, multiple authorizations signed by Derek, a pending transfer of $1.4 million from restricted employee retirement reserves, total suspicious payments $2.8 million. No one spoke while the accountant explained the transaction history. The evidence did not arrive dramatically. It appeared line by line. Dates, account numbers, invoices, signatures. That made it worse. Monica turned to Bradley. You said those accounts were protected. He looked at her. You approved the consulting structure. Derek stared between them. I asked him, did you know where the money came from? He swallowed. I knew there were temporary transfers from employee retirement funds. I was told they would be replaced. By whom? He had no answer. Victor placed the succession agreement beside the audit. The document Margaret was asked to sign would have certified these prior transactions and limited the incoming management team's exposure. One of the board members looked at Derek. You wanted your mother to approve this. Derek's eyes finally met mine. I thought we could fix it after the transition. There it was. Not innocence. Not confusion. A calculation that my signature could buy him time. The board voted to terminate Derek for cause remove Bradley Freeze, disputed compensation, preserve all records, and refer the evidence to investigators. The vote was not unanimous. It did not need to be. Monica stood. "You've destroyed your own son." I looked at her. "I didn't create those payments. I refuse to take responsibility for them." Derek rose slowly from Richard's chair. "Dad would never have done this to me." Victor opened Richard's final letter. He read one plain sentence: "Do not protect Derek from the consequences of choices he made knowingly." Derek closed his eyes. Then he stepped away from the chair. I waited until he left the room before walking to the head of the table. The leather was still warm when I placed my hand against it. They had expected me to surrender Richard's company. Instead, they had finally been forced to admit it had never belonged to them. The first week after the board meeting, Caldwell Freight Systems felt less like a company than a building holding its breath. Federal investigators used 2 conference rooms on the 3rd floor. Outside, accountants moved through the executive offices carrying locked cases and portable scanners. Employees spoke quietly near the elevators, pausing whenever someone from legal walked past. I arrived before 7 each morning. Not because I intended to reclaim every task I had surrendered years earlier, but because 230 people needed to know the company had not been abandoned. Helen met me outside Richard's office on Monday. "You don't have to work in there," she said. Through the glass wall, I could see his empty chair, the framed photograph of our first truck, and the yellow legal pad he had left beside the telephone. "Yes," I said, "for now I do." The office still carried traces of him: cedar from the cabinet, coffee in the carpet near his desk, the faint medicinal scent that had clung to his jacket during the last months of treatment. I sat down and opened the legal pad. Beside a freight estimate Richard had written, "Ask Maggie, she'll see what I missed." I covered my mouth with one hand. In the boardroom, I had remained calm because calmness was necessary. Alone in that office, I finally cried without measuring the sound. I cried for Richard. I cried for Derek. I cried for the version of our family I had protected long after the truth had begun changing underneath it. The investigation moved slowly, as real investigations do. The evidence Richard's auditors had gathered before his death gave authorities a strong beginning, but every transaction still had to be verified. Bank records required subpoenas. Vendor ownership had to be established. Digital approvals had to be matched to devices' locations and access credentials. Weeks passed before the full structure became clear. Bradley controlled the shell vendors through intermediaries. Monica had approved false consulting invoices and used company money for travel furnishings, tuition payments, and personal expenses. Derek had signed several major authorizations, and new restricted employee reserves were being used temporarily. His attorneys argued that he did not understand the full scale of the fraud. Perhaps that was true, but he had understood enough to ask me to sign beneath it. The company recovered much of the missing money through frozen accounts insurance claims and the sale of assets purchased with diverted funds. I personally guaranteed the temporary shortfall in the employee retirement reserve until those recoveries were complete. No driver lost $1. No warehouse employee watched decades of savings disappear because my family had treated the company as private property. At a company-wide meeting, I stood on the loading platform where Richard used to deliver safety briefings. Rows of employees filled the warehouse floor. Some had worked with us since the first expansion. Others knew me only as Richard's widow. "I cannot promise that this will be repaired quickly," I told them, "but I can promise that no employee will pay for decisions made by people who abuse their authority." The room remained quiet. Then Helen stood. The applause began near the operations team and moved through the warehouse until it reached the drivers gathered near the freight doors. I did not feel victorious. I felt accountable. That was more useful. Helen became Chief Operating Officer. We created an independent compliance committee and required outside review for major vendor contracts, retirement fund transfers, and executive appointments. For the first time, the Caldwell name no longer functioned as proof that someone could be trusted. Monica and Derek separated before the investigation reached its 4th month. Bradley's relationship with her became public through court filings. I did not follow the gossip. Humiliation was not justice, and it did nothing to restore what had been taken. Derek sent several messages. The first blamed Monica. The second blamed Bradley. The third said Richard's trust had made him feel trapped. I answered none of them. Then a handwritten letter arrived. It was only 3 pages. Derek admitted he had known for years that Chase was not biologically his. He wrote that shame had started the lie, and fear had kept it alive. Near the end, he wrote, "I told myself I was protecting my family. Eventually, I was only protecting what I expected to receive." It was the first time he had described his actions without making someone else responsible. I did not restore his position. I did not change the trust. I wrote back with one sentence. "When you are ready to speak without asking me to fix the consequences, I will listen." Chase learned the truth privately with a counselor present. He sat across from me in Richard's study, his hands locked together between his knees. When the explanation ended, he looked at me. "Does this mean I'm not your grandson?" The question broke through every layer of preparation I had built. I moved beside him. "You were my grandson before I knew anything about DNA." His eyes filled. "And now I know more about what the adults around you did. I do not love you less." He leaned into me and I held him as I had when he was small. The old bloodline provision was removed from the trust. Chase received a modest education fund independent of company ownership. He chose a state university and found part-time work with an equipment supplier unrelated to Caldwell Freight Systems. "I need to learn what I'm good at without everyone telling me what I'm supposed to inherit," he said. I thought Richard would have respected that. 6 months after the board meeting, Victor brought me one final envelope. Richard had instructed him to deliver it only after the company was secure. I carried it to the original warehouse. Our first delivery truck remained parked in the rear bay, restored but not polished beyond recognition. The gray paint was faded near the doors. A crack still ran through the steering wheel. I climbed into the cab and opened Richard's letter. He did not write about revenge. He did not ask me to punish anyone. He wrote about the folding table in our first apartment the nights I balanced invoices while he slept, and the morning I persuaded a bank manager to give us 1 more month. Then he wrote, "People called me the founder because I was the one they saw. You were the reason there was still a company for them to see. I'm sorry I let that truth become private." I read the line twice. Outside, the warehouse engines started one by one as the afternoon routes prepared to leave. For years, I had thought my place was beside Richard's legacy. Sitting behind the cracked steering wheel of the truck we bought together, I finally understood. I had not inherited his company. I had helped build our company. And this time, no one would ask me to step aside.